to me, one being builder's risk insurance, course of construction, and the other one being barbecue. We figured that would be a good topic right before Labor Day. Everybody's still thinking about barbecue, maybe our last big weekend. But personally, I barbecue all year long, so we're going to talk about that. I want to preface something, though, is what I'm going to tell you today, some of these poll questions are subjective. So I'm giving you my opinion on things. And it's just that, it's just an opinion. So don't take it personal, don't get upset. If you want to talk more about barbecue, by all means, give me a call, we'll talk about it. So let's have some fun today. But the first thing we're going to talk about is the builder's risk aspect of this. And what you think about is, think about everything that takes place outside of a structure. This could be residential or commercial, kind of focus on residential today. But so that's really what we're going to think about. And a lot of these things people don't think about, and the values have grown over the years. So we get asked this question every day: is a swimming pool covered? So a friend of mine just built a swimming pool and spent $150,000 on the pool. So it's a pretty nice residential pool. And I've seen, you can think of a hotel and a Olympic-sized swimming pool being built out back. So the question is it covered on the builder's risk? And the answer is, it does depend on the form, but under most forms, it would be covered as long as the value of that pool is included in the completed value of the structure. So make sure you include the value of the pool. So that's initially when you write ground up new construction. But what if a contractor comes to you and says, I'm going to put in a $150,000 pool, and he coverage on it? In that case, you would want to write an installation floater, which is a derivative of builder's risk. And you could write a $150,000 installation floater. So it really depends on, just to make sure. But these swimming pools are getting more and more ornate. I'm sure some of you have seen the shows on TV where they now build waterfalls and cliffs and all kinds of stuff. A friend of mine's pool actually has heating elements that run through the concrete around the pool, and that's what heats the pool. Somehow they heat the concrete first. I don't know how it works. I've seen these lighting systems, laser systems they put in pools now. So make sure it's included in the value of the structure when you write it. If you write the builder's risk on everything, and you should be covered fine. Room additions, we all think about those. So is a room addition covered? Well, once again, you could write an installation floater on the room addition itself. Or let's say in the middle of construction, you're writing a ground up new construction, and they decide to expand the product, to expand the home, they're going to add another room on. Just make sure you notify the underwriter as soon as possible on the increased value of that room addition. Now, a little underwriting for you here too on the room additions. If it's a horizontal addition, similar to what we're looking at here, and they're not changing the original roof line, that's a pretty easy risk to write. But now let's say they're adding a room upstairs. So they have a 2-story building and they're going to add a 3rd floor. That is what's called structural renovations. And there's a lot of underwriting that takes place on structural. So make sure you talk to the underwriter, and we would entertain those. You would just have to come to us, and we are going to ask a lot of questions on structural. So horizontal additions are good. It's easy. Just make sure you get the values right, and you'd be off and running. Summer kitchen, I threw that out there because that's what we call them down here in the South. Other people just call them, outdoor barbecues. But these things are getting more and more ornate. I was talking to Darcy before the meeting today, and one thing I did before this is I just walked around my neighborhood and looked at people's backyards just to get an idea what they're doing. And these summer kitchens they're building are getting unbelievable as far as the high-tech barbecue itself, the furniture that goes out there, the paving, the walls. These things can be very, very expensive. So the idea of what they're building outside, if it's when the house was first being built, make sure it's included in the value. If it's just a summer kitchen that's being added, shouldn't be a problem to write an installation floater on that. Okay, guys, here's where it's going to get very interesting. And once again, this is somewhat subjective as far as which state has the best ribs. So we're going to throw that out there. And, obviously there's probably good ribs across the United States from coast to coast. So the idea is, what I did was I've been all over the country and I've eaten ribs in a lot of different states, and I picked my favorite. So the poll is now open. Organizer must close poll to enable screen sharing. So I guess I need to. Hopefully everybody's seeing this. So which state has the best ribs? Okay, here I'm going to give you my answer now, guys. There you go. So I literally have eaten ribs around the United States, and my favorite place to eat ribs is the great state of Tennessee. We can be a little more, particular, and I might say Memphis because that's where I had some really good ribs. But I will say I've had good ribs in lots of other states too. So we'll see at the end of the meeting. We'll look at the results of the poll and see what we're looking at. All right, let's talk about landscaping. And this is something that I have seen vary from course of construction, builder's risk policy to policy. They're very different. I've seen a lot of people, a lot of companies that exclude it. I've seen some companies that put limitations, so much per tree or so much per, or even a percentage of the value of the structure is covered. Our form is very broad, so as long as you include the value of the landscaping, it's covered. So to give you an idea, my neighbor put in a nice palm tree, and the tree itself was $15,000 just for the tree. So you can see that some of these landscaping ideas that people do can be very, very expensive. So make sure that you look at the form that you're selling, that it's all covered. Once again, completed value, just make sure the landscaping is included in the original value of the home, and you'll be off and coming on the landscaping. Fountains. I just put that in there because I've seen more and more fountains. I was talking to a landscaper the other day, and they put in that kind of, I said, what would a fountain like this cost me? And he was like this and that, but we're looking at literally thousands of dollars to put the fountain in, not just the fountain itself, but think about the electrical work that goes into a fountain, and obviously the water supply, and there's a lot of different, the lighting on these fountains. So keep in mind, it can be very, very expensive on the fountain side of things. Concrete. Think about something as simple as concrete. And is it covered? Yes, it is. It's covered. And so a lot of this, summer kitchen's going to start with a slab. You're going to have a lot of concrete done. Maybe there's going to be walkways. You're going to actually pour the walkway. All the value of that concrete should be included when you write the original structure. And the importance of a lot of this is something called co-insurance to avoid that. We're trying to tell everyone, make sure that all of the labor, all of the materials for the project is included when you initially write the builder's risk policy. If you do that, you're never going to have a problem. Sometimes builders forget to include these things. Same thing with the plumbing. I get asked that all the time. The underground plumbing, the rough plumbing in the structure, all of these things are included as long as the value of that was included when you wrote the policy. And a lot of times, another way of looking at it is when you have a house, you're going to have underground plumbing that's going to tie into the main, let's just say there's no septic tanks. So it's going to tie into the main line. So everything from the main line to the house is going to be covered on the form as long as it's reported correctly, as long as you have the value in there. And I don't know if any of you have had any plumbing work done. I have had recently. Needless to say, plumbers make a pretty good living in today's world. So this stuff is very expensive. It's not just the materials. It's also the labor to do the plumbing. So labor and materials. Okay, guys, another poll question on the barbecue. Which state has the best pulled pork? And I will tell you, the other day, I smoked 18 pounds of pork shoulder, and it was perfect. Probably the best pulled pork I ever did. So it is, and for those of you that are getting new into barbecue, it's actually one of the easier meats to smoke. And remember, when I talk about barbecue, I'm really talking about smoking meat, and the key is low and slow. And we'll leave you to your own on that one. But this is not something that you go out and do in a few minutes. It takes a little while. So if you want to invest in one thing, I will say invest in a good meat thermometer. It's always about the internal temperature of the meat. So which state has the best pulled pork? Let's think about that a second. Okay, I think we have enough votes in now. North Carolina has the best pulled pork, in my estimation. I've had some very good pulled pork across the United States, but I will give North Carolina credit for that. Probably a close second would be South Carolina, by the way. But that's my feeling on this. It's gonna be interesting to see what the answers are. So back to builder's risk. Let's talk about irrigation. That's another thing too. So you have extremely ornate landscaping. Most of the country is going to require irrigation. So that's once again going to be the plumbing work, the materials, the electrical work for the irrigation. I will say it's interesting if you're out west, maybe in Arizona, for example, New Mexico, they have a lot of xeriscape landscaping, which I love. I think it's great. It's natural and they don't have to have any irrigation. But even out there, I've seen some very ornate, maybe retaining walls and landscaping put in. They can spend a lot of money. So just remember, it can be expensive no matter where you're at in the United States. So moving on from irrigation. Oh, by the way, too, it's funny. I live in Florida, and yet I spend a lot of money on watering my grass. And my friends from up north come down and look at it, and they say, it looks like crabgrass. And I'm like, I have to pay someone to fertilize it, and then I have to pay to water it, and then I got to pay somebody to cut it. So it's kind of funny what we do with these things, but that's just an aside. Fencing. Let's think about fencing. Is it covered? Is it not covered? Once again, most forms, you got to be careful, got to read the form. But on our form, for example, it is covered. But make sure you include the cost of that fencing. So if there is something that can happen to it, you think something could happen to the fencing when it's being installed? How about it might disappear? Mysterious disappearance. Might get vandalized. If it's combustible material, it might even burn up. There's a lot of things that can happen to it. Maybe a windstorm comes along and blows it away. That's seen that happen before too. So make sure that fencing is included in the value when you build these things, when you first write the policy. Retaining walls, I put that in there because we get asked that a lot too. So the retaining wall itself, once again, concrete, could be pavers, could be concrete. The landscaping is built into these retaining walls. We see a lot of these that are built in mountainous climates because they're trying to shore up the whole job site, the grading of the land. So there's a lot of value in the retaining wall itself. And once again, this is materials and labor. So think of the labor to build these retaining walls. There's a lot of values there. So these are things you probably never thought about as far as builder's risk goes. Pavers, very, very popular down here in my neighborhood. People put in pavers for driveways. They put in pavers for the walkways. You're seeing more and more of this. These things can be very expensive, and obviously they're expensive to install. Kind of an artwork to it. I've talked to some of the contractors do this, and they're almost, and even the landscapers are almost like artists as far as what they design, and it's very, very interesting. But once again, very expensive. So, all right, we have another barbecue question coming up. Which city has the best barbecue? This is where it gets really, it's going to be interesting to see what you all come up with here. So which city has the best barbecue? And this was once again the world according to Jeff Benson. And I've eaten some great barbecue around the country, literally from coast to coast. It's kind of funny. That's what I do when I go to an area. I will find a barbecue restaurant. So I could be in Portland, Maine. I could be in Seattle, Washington. I could be in, name another place, Jackson, Mississippi. And I still try to find the best barbecue. I like barbecue. So what do we think about what city has the best barbecue? Austin, Texas. And it is funny, one of my best friends lives in Austin, good buddy of mine. He likes to tell me how great their barbecue is all the time. I get a little tired of hearing about it because he brags about it a lot. But I have been there a number of times, and in my estimation, they have the best. They have a lot of good places. And another thing too about barbecue is sometimes the very best barbecue are on these the food trucks. We forget about the food trucks, but a lot of these places started out as a food truck. One of the famous places in Austin is Franklin Barbecue, and he started as a food truck, and now he's probably number one. I guess if you had to pick the very best guy in the world at barbecue right now, it might be him. So if you're ever there, it's hard to get in. You got to stand in line. But Franklin's is very, very good. Give it a plug for that. Planters. I just put that in there as I was walking around, but I'm thinking, think of the values as you drive by in a nicer neighborhood, not only of the landscaping, the tree themselves, but the plants themselves, thousands of dollars, but the planters they're in. I just, literally you could spend thousands and thousands of dollars. And the issue would be this: if something happens and it's not covered, and the builder comes to you or the owner of the structure and says, yeah, that $25,000 fountain, I know it's covered, right, Mr. or Mrs. Agent? You got to say, well, no, actually it's not covered. That's not the conversation you want to have. So, and I could tell a lot of claim stories over the years of things I've seen that you wouldn't think about. So one time I think this took place in Tennessee. One time we had a guy and they stole his lawn. This is from a builder. And so I actually said, I had to call him. I said, what? They had the entire yard sodded. This was on a Friday. So the sod was delivered on Friday. They laid the entire yard. They came back Monday morning. Somebody had come and taken the entire yard. So they literally stole the sod. Now, I was scratching my head. I said, well, did they probably sod the house next door or something down the street? And he goes, well, it's kind of hard to prove that. So, there was no video of it. So think about the value of the sod for an entire yard. So things do happen that we don't think about. Lighting. That's the other thing. So one of my neighbors had some landscape lighting, and I thought, that looks cool. I said, who did that for you? And they gave me the name of the subcontractor, and I called them. And the guy came out, and he was measuring my yard and this and that. And then it was all said and done. He said, I can do this for you. And I go, well, what are we looking at? He said, it'll be about $12,000. I'm like, excuse me? So, I was thinking of a couple of solar powered lights stuck here and there. And he said, no, they have sensors on them. They turn on and off. They're Wi-Fi connected. You can turn them on and off and program them and this and that, different colors. And I was like, yeah, a little too much for me. But the idea is, once again, the values that are outside the house add up dramatically. And people are doing this every day. It's kind of becoming, a lot of this stuff is almost becoming part of a house. It's just like the smart house, all the electrical stuff that are put in. It's the same thing for what happens outside of the house. Mailboxes, something as simple as that. These are getting more and more ornate, a lot of concrete mailboxes. I've seen everything, and it's just crazy. And it was funny, a friend of mine lives at the beach, and he had a really nice mailbox, and somebody had a little too much, a little overserved, and they ran into the mailbox. Now, it totaled the car and actually hurt the driver, but he was very upset about his mailbox because it put a big crack in the mailbox. But I was thinking, it was actually an SUV, his mailbox, and he was worried about the mailbox. I just thought that was kind of fun. But these things can, once again, thousands of dollars. Screen enclosures. I want to touch on those for a second because they're a hot item down here in Florida. A lot of homeowners policies now will exclude screen enclosures because, as you know, we get the tropical winds once in a while. Speaking of that, we got to be thinking about our friends on the Texas-Louisiana state line. I think later tonight and early tomorrow morning, they're going to get hit with a big storm, and we all got our fingers crossed. But these screened-in enclosures are extremely expensive, and they're very wind exposed. So make sure, even on the homeowner's policy, that there is full coverage. So, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 just for the screened-in enclosure. But once again, included on the builder's risk, as long as the value of that screen enclosure is included in the completed value of the structure. And these things can contribute. So now you start adding up everything we're talking about, and you get an idea. We're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars that are outside of the structure. Driveways, same thing. Do I need to say it? Could be pavers, could be poured concrete, could be gravel, could be anything. But there's a value to these driveways that they put in houses now, and make sure it's included in the value. Okay, guys, we're getting near the end now, and this is one of the big ones. Be very interesting to see exactly what we have going on here. So, which state has the best overall barbecue? And I started thinking about this as I thought about it, and you can see that the the Southeast is well represented in these polls. I don't want to forsake the rest of the country. I was telling the story that one of the best barbecue dinners I've had in a long, long time was in Manhattan, New York City. I was like, wow, this is really good barbecue. So the owner happened to come around to the table, was talking to everybody, and I asked him, I said, where are you from? And he said, well, I'm actually from Birmingham, Alabama. I scratched my head. Okay. His restaurant was in New York, but he was from Alabama. So another thing is just another story, a barbecue story. I watch these barbecue shows on TV all the time, Barbecue Pitmasters. And there was a chef from Connecticut that won one of the contest in Georgia or something. And it was kind of funny because they were making fun of him being from Connecticut, and yet he won the contest. And so it does, there's great barbecue everywhere. I will say probably the best tri-tip barbecue I've ever had has been in California. They make great tri-tip out there. So there's great food everywhere. So anyway, which state has the best overall barbecue? This might not be a surprise to everybody, but in my estimation, there we go. The great state of Texas does have the best barbecue. It's kind of like a religion or a science or whatever you want to call it down there in Texas, but they do know how to barbecue. And I didn't really do this, but they have by far the best brisket, which when you really get into this barbecue thing, the brisket is the hardest of all the meats to cook. It can be really, really good, or it can be really, really bad. It's trial and error. That's all I'll tell you about the brisket. So Texas wins today for the best state, and I'll go with Austin as the best city. So it'll be interesting to see what the poll results are. So I think without further ado, I've talked enough about Builders Risk and Barbecue today. Let's open it up to questions, Darcy. See what we got.
All right, Jeff. First question relates to Builders Risk. Can you expand on the use of installation floaters? Who purchases this, and when is it most appropriate to use?
All right, so the easiest way to look at that, and this goes beyond everything we even talked about today. So a builder's risk policy is written on the overall project. It's written on the entire project that's taking place. Could be the framing, the concrete work, the electrical, the plumbing, the roofing, interior trim, everything that goes into that structure is written on the builder's risk. The installation floater is specific to a certain trade. So let's say a roofing contractor comes to you and says, I need coverage because I'm putting a new roof on. That's all he wants. So you would write an installation floater for the roofing contractor or the electrical contractor or the plumber. And in the case of what we're talking about today, a lot of time it's a landscape contractor or something like that. You would write a installation floater, which is roughly the same policy as the builder's risk, but just for that individual trade. So think about that. And as far as when it's appropriate, I'd want to get it in place before they start the project. And then when they start it, they got full coverage and you're off and running. Good question.
All right, next question is about barbecue. What's better, fatty or lean brisket?
Whew. So brisket is something that I'm still learning. I'll tell you, so I did probably a couple of pros on the line today. My buddy from Waxahachie's probably on the line. He's going to say, "Oh my God," scratching his head. But there's two different cuts of the brisket. You have the flat cut and then the point. And so the point's a little fattier, but that's where the burnt end comes from. So every brisket has, its own marbling. It's a little different, and you can get really particular on what you want. I will say this though, it's good to get the whole packer brisket, cook it all at once. Then you have both. You have the lean part or the fatty part, and you can do whatever you want. So I will say, he told me one day, he's like, when he cooks a brisket, he gives away the lean part to his neighbors. He keeps the fatty part for himself because it tastes better. So that was coming from an old pro there. But the other big thing on briskets is, do you cook it fat side up or fat side down? So there is no right or wrong answer to that. I've listened to all the people in the world talk about it. I will say Franklin, who was on TV last weekend, I was watching, and he said absolutely fat side up. But then the guy that was on the show with him said absolutely fat side down. So no right or wrong there. So good question.
All right, it looks like those were all of the questions that we've had for today.
I like that. You were all
So
stunned.
what do you think, Jeff? Should we give people time back in their day?
Yeah, I think so. So how long did this take today, guys? Usually, we're at 26 minutes. That's about right. Hopefully you had a little fun. We were trying to do a little differently today, but I see a lot of mistakes made on values. So you heard that was kind of the theme of today, is making sure the values are correct. Don't try to save a little bit of money when you write a builder's risk policy or an installation floater by undervaluing what's happening, because it's just creates problems down the road and you just don't want to do it. So labor, materials, overhead, profit, all of those things should be included when you write a policy, and then we'll never have a problem. So, and maybe on the installation floater it's a little harder, but still they know what they charge. They know what they quoted. They know what they're doing. So I think there we go. You already see me all day, but if you guys have any questions at all, there's my contact information. And my senior underwriter, Donna Barry, is available at any time. So make sure you pick up the phone and call us, email us with any of your questions. And I really, really appreciate your time today. And we'll do our best to help you out going forward. Stay tuned for, we'll be doing another webinar in the future. If you have any ideas, by all means, let us know and we'll take it down that path. So without further ado, get back to your day, write some business and stay safe. Talk to you later.